everybody. It is Wednesday, October 11th. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, we in this household are really swinging into this Wednesday.
I like what you did there, Moshe. I believe that you are referring to a swing, a baby swing that we gave you guys that hopefully is giving you a little bit of time back in your day and keeping baby Olivia very comfortable.
Yeah, for those of you who've been listening, you know that Jill and her husband and her entire family have so kindly donated a whole number of baby things to us. And one of them recently arrived, the baby swing, an electronic baby swing. One of those things that's nice to have when, you know, you're just looking for the little one to get a few Z's in and not having to carry them around the apartment to get it.
It is like magic. You feel bad. You're like, this feels like I know. Should I be really putting my baby in a swing that's rocking back and forth with music and a mobile that's turning? And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute. I could go make myself a cup of coffee, or I can or I can answer an email. And you're like, it's fine. It'll be fine.
I'm discovering now, Jill, already as a very new parent, the memes, many of the memes coming true, including the like making yourself a cup of coffee but then never drinking it, and you're always having a cold cup of coffee because like you've left it just to when it was ready because the baby needed you, and then you can't get to it till 3 or 4 hours later. There
is so much truth in all of those memes. Parenthood is definitely interesting. All right, Moshe, but let's get to some news here because there is still so much going on, especially in the Middle East. Now for the headlines here. Israel at war with Hamas, the latest from the region, and what comes next. Plus, President Biden forcefully backing Israel and says that Americans have been killed and taken hostage by Hamas. Meanwhile, more healthcare workers protest their working conditions. This time, Walgreens pharmacy staff walk off the job. California becoming the first U.S. state to ban 4 potentially harmful chemicals in food. What it means for people who don't live in California. New charges against George Santos.
Jill, your congressman continues to take things to yet another level.
We will never mention George Santos without also mentioning that he is my congressman.
So you didn't vote for him. We know that.
Plus, which brands are popular with teen shoppers? And the bigger question, Moshe, have we oldens ever heard of some of them?
Test me.
Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
We have a presidential theme today to On This Day in History. Jill, a big day for your favorite musician. And I'll give you a little history on Thomas Edison and the light bulb. Something might surprise you.
Okay, let's start, though, with the latest out of the Middle East, where the death toll keeps climbing. Israel now says that more than 1,000 people were killed in those attacks on Saturday, as they continue to find more people murdered in the weekend terrorist attack. And it's now becoming clear that Hamas has taken about 150 Israelis hostage. Hamas says 900 people have died in Gaza as Israel has started to pummel Hamas sites across the territory. And more than 200,000 Palestinians have been displaced as the Israeli counterattack vowing to eliminate Hamas continues. So that's about 10% of the population. We also learned Tuesday that there are still 20 or more missing Americans after Saturday's attack. President Biden giving a forceful address to the nation. He said at least 14 Americans were killed and that some U.S. citizens, again, among the hostages. He described the Hamas attack as, quote, an act of unadulterated evil and said that Israel has a right to respond.
There are moments in this life, and I mean this literally, when the pure, unadulterated evil is unleashed on this world. The people of Israel lived through one such moment this weekend. The bloody hands of the terrorist organization Hamas, a group whose stated purpose for being is to kill Jews. This was an act of sheer evil.
Biden confirming Hamas is threatening to execute the hostages in what he described as, quote, a violation of every code of human morality. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, he is expected to travel to Israel today to, quote, engage our Israeli partners directly about the situation on the ground. Interestingly, Moshe, Biden, in his speech, did not call for restraint from Israel, which is something that we have heard before whenever there has been an eruption in violence.
Yeah, and it's not just President Biden. This other Western powers as well. We haven't seen that in a very long time. But given what the West saw, right, these sadistic, horrific attack on Israeli civilians, effectively the message from the French, from the Germans, from the Brits, from the Australians, from the U.S. is Israel, do what you need to do to deal with the murders of more than 1,000 of your citizens and that terrorist group that lives on your border. A warning here, though, for these next 30 seconds, if you want to skip ahead, if you have kids in the car, because we want to mention one of the most horrific discoveries from Tuesday, and it speaks to why you're seeing the response from the Israelis and what is about to unfold. The Israelis discovered in one of the kibbutzes, one of the towns that was invaded by Hamas on Saturday, that at least 40 babies were killed in just one town, including some beheaded. It's beyond the pale, and why for many Israelis, they're telling their government, do what it takes, eliminate this group. We cannot have this, the state of shock that the country is experiencing. And one of the reasons you're hearing President Biden and others say that Hamas has adopted ISIS tactics. And as the Prime Minister of Israel has said, well, the West eliminated ISIS. And if Hamas is going to act like ISIS, we need to eliminate them too.
And I just want to let that sink in a little bit. I mean, I don't want to let it sink in, especially, look, you have a new baby. I have two young kids. It is so painful to hear these stories. I can't even imagine for the people who are living it. But I don't just want to gloss over it. I mean, these are war crimes. What we are witnessing and what happened is so beyond the pale, as you said. It is unimaginable.
The purposeful murder of civilians is terrorism by definition, right? But not just civilians. Again, young children, the elderly, the disabled, the types of things that people go to prison for, go to war crimes tribunals for. The type of behavior, by the way, that we've seen in some instances by the Russians in Ukraine. And so already some international bodies are starting to document the war crimes committed by Hamas here. And as people say, there are calls to say, well, everyone needs to de-escalate. And you're seeing that from certain parts of the Arab world, China, Russia, etc. But for many Israelis, they're like, do you understand what just took place here? They're still finding more dead bodies days later. And the stories, we continue to learn more about what actually took place. Jill, I know we discussed it on yesterday's pod. You cited a number of the examples of the types of crimes that were committed on Saturday.
Moshe, I think the other thing that's really important to mention as we talk about this is that Israel is such a small country. There are, 8 million people total?
Yeah, about
9 million people.
Yeah.
It's about the population of New York City. Everyone is connected in some way. And so much focus of the world is focused on Israel and the Middle Eastern conflict that I think it conflates how big the area is. But when you look at a map, that's when you realize how small of an area we're actually talking about between Israel, the West Bank, Gaza. It is just such a small, compact area that these people are all living really like feet apart from each other.
Yeah, it's like if there was a terror group, to carry through your New York City example here, Jill, it's like New York City is Israel, and there's a terror group in New Jersey just across the river that's came across on Saturday and murdered 1,000 people, raped people, kidnapped people, etc. Israel's like, well, we need to do something about our neighbors across the border who committed war crimes against us on Saturday. So with all that said, Israel continues to expand its mobilization of reservists to 360,000 now that are moving towards the south. It came as Israel has now regained effective control over the areas that Hamas invaded on Saturday. The big question right now is whether Israel will launch a ground assault into Gaza. That's that 25-mile strip of land that's nestled in there between Israel, Egypt, and the Mediterranean Sea. It's home to 2.3 million people. It's been governed by Hamas, the terror group, since 2007, so about 16 years now. The response so far significant, but similar to previous attacks. But Israel promises to take things to the next level. They've been pounding Gaza with deadly airstrikes, destroying dozens of buildings. Hamas continues to fire rockets and missiles into Israel and fight back. Israeli tank units have been sent to the south. That's all fueling the speculation that Israel will, in earnest, begin a ground invasion here. Keep in mind, this ain't the first round of fighting between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. There's been 4 rounds already between 2008 and 2021. They all ended inconclusively, with Hamas battered but still in control of Gaza. This time, though, Israel promising to decimate them, to eliminate them, saying they have gone too far. We tried to think that they might be a responsible entity, and based on the war crimes that are committed against babies, against the elderly, the kidnapping, that's over. The question is, how far do the Israelis need to go here? They're going for total victory. That's unachievable unless you conduct a full-on ground invasion into Gaza. That would require a complete reoccupation of Gaza, something the Israelis have not been looking to do, wanting to do, able to do, and yet here we are. So there's a short-term thing, which is save the Israeli hostages, right? By the way, Americans, other internationals that were taken hostage, save them, eliminate Hamas's firepower, but then long-term, who now governs this piece of land? What we're really talking about here is regime change that the Israelis are looking for, which is not a couple-day operation. It's not a couple-week operation. This would be a very significant thing, and it means that Israel has to very much decide right now what its mission is and keep that consistent, because in many cases, whether it's Israel, the U.S., etc., in war, when you don't have a clear mission, victory becomes much more challenging.
And the fighting also threatens to become this wider regional conflict, which could mean Hezbollah could get involved. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. They're based in Lebanon. Hezbollah fought a war with Israel back in 2006. So will they get involved? They did say in a statement that they're closely following the, quote, important developments in the Palestinian situation with great interest. Hezbollah thought to be even stronger, more organized, and better equipped than Hamas. So their involvement would make this a 2-front war and potentially a lot more complicated.
Yeah, just to jump in there, Jill, Hezbollah, Hamas, what do they have in common? Well, they both have the same godfather, Iran. Iran funds both of them. Iran provides both of them weapons. And Iran is the country that they're both looking to for guidance here. That is why you continue to see the U.S., Israel, and other Western powers say, no one else get involved here. And a lot of that language, while explicitly they're not saying Iran, they mean Iran. Iran, do not escalate things further and create a regional war here. So please keep Hezbollah down and keep this isolated to Israel and Hamas. And that's the big question we have in the coming days.
As for what's happening on the ground in Gaza, hospitals there running out of supplies to treat people who have been wounded. The only power plant is on the brink of a shutdown. The Israeli government, as we mentioned, is engaged in a total siege on the territory. They were urging Palestinians to leave the area, but the sole remaining access from Egypt, that shut down Tuesday after Israeli airstrikes hit near the border crossing.
Yeah, and we should note the Egyptians are like, we don't want to take people in right now, and we're pissed at the Israelis for suggesting that Palestinians leave Gaza for Egypt. By the way, that border crossing shut down because Hamas, which has also built tunnels there, was using it to funnel in weapons. And that's the tragic thing for the Palestinian people here, who suffer consistently and continually with the terrorists that govern the Gaza Strip. A new tactic here that Israel is now warning Gazans to evacuate entire neighborhoods to avoid devastation, and then inflicting devastation on those neighborhoods. This could be a prelude to a ground offensive that Israel basically clearing area for them to invade. Israel has typically gone building by building. Now they're going neighborhood by neighborhood. And the issue you face is that Hamas embeds itself in residential buildings. It embeds its weapons, its missiles, its units within residential buildings, partially using the Palestinian populace as a human shield of sorts. So you're seeing that play out, and that's something to watch, because as these casualty numbers come up, as you continue to see these devastating images now of Palestinian civilians suffering at the hands of the counter assault, what does that mean for potentially bringing in Hezbollah, bringing in Iran, lighting up the Arab world, upset at those images of Palestinian suffering? In particular, what Hamas is hoping for is a multi-front battle against Israel, particularly from their Palestinian brothers and sisters in the West Bank. And so far, you've seen some protests, some skirmishes in the West Bank, but nothing major so far. And that's something Hamas was hoping to inspire. And what they do know is that images of Palestinian suffering tend to do that. Notable number, by the way, Jill, before we leave this for the day, the bodies of roughly 1,500 Hamas fighters were found on Israeli territory, according to the Israeli Defense Forces. Again, that means that potentially 2,000 plus terrorists were able to invade Israel in an unprecedented situation on Saturday. And it's not clear whether those numbers overlap with the Palestinian death count. Either way, an unspeakable, unfathomable situation, the fact that they're able to find 1,500 terrorists just dead in Israel, because, of course, many of them were able to return alive to the Gaza Strip.
And when you're talking about those types of numbers, the fact that this was undetected by Israeli intelligence, even that much more shocking. And I realize that this is a discussion for another day, and an investigation, I'm sure, is going on in Israel right now to figure out what went wrong. But how they didn't pick up on any sort of chatter, and there are reports that they were practicing and rehearsing, it just becomes that much more incredible that nothing was picked up.
Yeah, Hamas has mock Israeli towns where they apparently were staging rehearsals. Also, it's really hard to keep a secret amongst a few people. How do you keep a secret among several thousand terrorists? And I'll add one more thing. As Israel potentially invades Gaza here, given the intelligence failure that they saw on Saturday, what else do the Israelis not know about what's going on with Hamas? Or was it sort of a one-trick pony? And that'll be one of the big questions that certainly will sow doubt within the Israelis, which is, what else don't we know about what Hamas has been up to, what their capabilities are, especially as we leave Israel and go back into their home territory?
What we didn't mention is that even on Tuesday, they still had a supply of missiles that they were continuing to fire. So the question is, what is their stockpile? Where is it? All of this catching Israel by surprise. Time now for the speed read from the Washington Post. Thousands of Walgreens pharmacy staff across the country are walking off work this week, alleging that poor working conditions are putting employees and patients at risk. The walkout could impact hundreds of stores throughout today. It is not clear whether any pharmacies have actually stopped operations. Pharmacists, technicians, and support staff claim that increased demands on understaffed teams, such as administering vaccines while battling hundreds of backlogged prescriptions, have become untenable and are impeding their ability to do their jobs responsibly. The organizer said, quote, "When you're a pharmacist, a missed letter or a number that's wrong in a prescription could kill somebody."
Organizers are talking about the fact that all this pressure that they're having of administering the extra vaccines and short staffing, making it impossible to do their jobs responsibly. You know, we put a lot of responsibility on pharmacists. I think we take it for granted that when you go in there, that you're going to get the drug that you need, that they understand the side effects, they understand what other conditions you have, and there's a lot there. And in one instance, one of the organizers has been saying that a regional leader at Walgreens who visited their store, as he was juggling thousands of prescription backlogs, told him to stop what he was doing and instead focus on vaccination appointments because there's better profit to Walgreens from the vaccinations. There's apparently also been an uptick in violence from customers who've been frustrated by these delays that poor pharmacists are having to deal with. The company, for its part, tells the Washington Post that it recognizes the last few years have been, quote, unprecedented and a very challenging time. They say we're making significant investments in pharmacists' wages, hiring bonuses to attract and retain talent in harder to staff locations. As far as employees here, they're requesting the company hire even more pharmacy staff, establish mandatory training hours, offer transparency in how payroll hours are assigned to stores, and give advance notice when staff will be cut or when a position opens. Organizers say the actions were inspired by a pharmacy employee walkout at a CVS in Kansas City a few weeks ago. Walgreens employees, just like CVS, are not unionized. So these efforts actually came together on a subreddit online for pharmacy staff. Jill, there's a number of pharmacists in the Mo News community. We often hear from them. And many say the last place they want to work is a chain pharmacy because of the conditions, because of the pressure, because of the wages. And it's only gotten worse in recent years.
I had to pick up a prescription for my daughter the other day, and our pharmacy is so short staffed that at 3 p.m. we went to go get it, and there was a sign that just said, "Sorry, emergency, pharmacy closed. We'll be back tomorrow." And we're like, "No, we really need her medicine." She was really sick. Luckily, I was able to call it into a different pharmacy, but that just tells you how incredibly short-staffed they are. From CNN, California Governor Gavin Newsom has signed a landmark law aimed at banning red dye number 3 and other potentially harmful food additives in consumer goods, making California the first state in the country to forbid the use of the ingredients found in many popular candies, drinks, and more. Newsom's move brings the U.S. slightly closer to a food environment like that of the European Union, where these chemicals are already banned, quote, because of scientific studies that have demonstrated significant public health harms, including increased risk of cancer, behavioral issues in children, harm to the reproductive system, and damage to the immune system. The California Food Safety Act, as it's called, prohibits the manufacture, sale, or distribution of food products in California containing red dye number 3, potassium brominated vegetable oil, or propylparaben. I think the rule is when you can't pronounce it, it's probably not healthy for you. It's probably not something you should be ingesting.
Jill, we should be cautious. Some of these you definitely should not be ingesting. Some of these just components that are not harmful to you. We don't want to be in the business of telling people, like, if you can't pronounce it, you can't eat it.
Right.
We are pretty advanced these days, but it is interesting to see California make this move.
Yeah, the potassium bromate, apparently that's added to baked goods to help dough strengthen and rise higher. In some beverages, brominated vegetable oil emulsifies a citrus flavoring, preventing separation. And propylparabens used for food preservation. Nearly 3,000 products use red dye number 3 as an ingredient, including sweets like Skittles, Nerds, and certain gummies, protein shakes, instant rice and potato products, and boxed cake mixes. This is according to the Environmental Working Group's Eat Well guide.
So it's an interesting move here by California, which tends to be pretty progressive on these things and will often be a leading indicator of where the country will go on a number of things. We've seen California be a first mover. Here, usually Europe goes first, then California, and then the rest of the U.S. Red dye number 3 actually was banned from cosmetic use 30 years ago by the FDA due to concerns about it being a carcinogen. But it's still used in the popular candies you mentioned, Skittles, Nerds, also candies like Peeps, as well as other foods, cookies, colored drinks, etc. The governor of California pointed to the Europeans, saying that is the proof that the food industry is capable of maintaining product lines while complying with different public health laws, because they've changed the law in Europe, and yet, Skittles and these other candies have adapted to those European laws. Now, this bill won't be implemented till 2027, so the companies have a few years to change their ingredients and comply with the law. The governor is saying this gives them significant time to avoid these harmful chemicals and find a better way to manufacture their goods. One thing to note here, because of the size of California's economy, this law may affect the food industry across the country. You have nearly 40 million Californians. Basically, 1 in 10 Americans lives in California. So the fact that they're making this change, if you're producing one of these candies, are you going to basically make 2 lines, one for California and one for everyone else? Or are you going to just adapt to the California law for everybody? So we might all benefit. Red dye number 3 might be gone for all of us in 2027 as these manufacturers figure out what to do next.
It's similar to how Europe's laws regarding the tech industry impact us as well, because you see these companies like Apple that aren't going to design 2 different products, one for people in Europe and one for everybody else.
Yeah, you can think if you've gotten a new iPhone 15 and they're using USB-C charger now, which is the same one you use for your laptop and iPad, you can thank the Europeans for that, who are like, why are you making people buy all this stuff? The lightning cable, the USB-C cable, etc. And so the Europeans or the Californians, sometimes you can thank them for making things slightly more consumer friendly.
From the New York Times, federal prosecutors on Tuesday filed a significant array of additional charges against New York Congressman George Santos, accusing him of new criminal schemes like stealing the identities and credit card details of donors to his campaign. The new accusations were made in a 23-count superseding indictment that laid out how Santos had charged his donors' credit cards repeatedly without their authorization.
This is a congressman. This is a congressman who's like, cool, I got your credit card number. Let me steal some of your money.
Just when you think he couldn't get any more corrupt.
You donated to his campaign, and he's like, I'll take more where that's from.
Santos then distributed the money to his and other candidates' campaigns and to his own bank account, of course. This new indictment.
Yes.
The new indictment filed added 10 charges against Santos, including conspiracy to commit offenses against the United States, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, access device fraud, false statements to the FEC, and falsifying records to obstruct the commission.
Jill, what's the reaction like on Long Island right now in your 3rd district?
Actually, Tom Suozzi, who is a former congressman, former county executive here, just announced that he is going to run to try to unseat George Santos. Suozzi is a Democrat, but he said he's going to be running.
I imagine he might not have a tough time given that now Santos faces 23 counts and potential prison time here. This updated indictment with the additional counts comes just a few days after his campaign treasurer, her name was Nancy Marks, she had pleaded guilty to a felony count of conspiracy to defraud the U.S. and admitted to her role in reporting a fictional $500,000 loan. She had a co-conspirator in that allegation. His name, George Santos. She's like, yeah, we conspired together on it. And so we're getting at this point, but let's make it very clear. These accusations against Santos, the first-term congressman, are very different from typical corruption cases that we cover with politicians. Many of those are very intricate quid pro quos where you got to try to prove stuff because the politicians know that, these are crimes and they try to find ways around it. Complex legal questions about bribe, etc. Santos, he's just a run-of-the-mill grifter. Like, he's doing very basic stuff like, let me steal people's credit card numbers. Among the things Santos did in this updated indictment, he stole the credit card number to transfer $11,000 to his own bank account. He swindled $50,000 from 2 other donors using a fake nonprofit. He then used the money to buy designer goods and settle personal debts. And apparently, as part of this indictment, it reads on and on. Frankly, it's a very good read. He faked being wealthy to impress Republican leaders, reported a fictitious $500,000 loan, that's the one we mentioned, to get their financial support, made up tens of thousands of dollars in donations to give the impression of political success, and then was taking donations, the actual ones, and then stealing more money. I mean, what? And the man is still a sitting congressman. I mean, that's the amazing thing. We're waiting right now to see what Republicans do when it comes to their next Speaker of the House. You know who still has a vote in that? George Santos. He's still a sitting member of Congress. He votes on all those big issues that you care about as constituents. And he's one of 435 members of Congress, despite this indictment.
And you forgot to mention he lied about pretty much everything in his history, including his name.
His name, his mother, where she was born, the fact that she was not a Holocaust survivor. I mean, we don't really. This man is it's actually.
He's like the talented Mr. Ripley, kind of.
I was going to say, like, I don't want to give him credit, but like, it's amazing what he's pulled off.
It's quite the coup. All right, from CNBC, a look at teen shopping trends. Teens are notoriously fickle, but the group is also often on the leading edge of many trends that the rest of us eventually adopt. So teens' self-reported annual spending is actually down about 1% compared to last fall, down 4% from the spring, according to Piper Sandler's biannual teen survey released on Tuesday. So male teens, interestingly, they spent 11% more than last fall. Females are spending about 8% less. Nike is still the favorite brand for apparel and footwear for both male and female teens for the 12th year running. When it comes to clothes, after Nike, American Eagle and Lululemon are second and third, while Shine moved up to number 4. overtaking H&M. Teens are also putting less money into footwear, but males did outspend females on shoes by about $80 a year. Converse held the spot for the second most favorite brand behind Nike. Of course, Nike owns Converse. Adidas held the number 3 spot, and New Balance gained 2 percentage points to become the 4th favorite brand, surpassing Vans, which is now in the number 5 spot. Crocs owned Hey Dude come in at number 6 and number 7,
Hey,
respectively.
Dude. Remember that show? Nickelodeon back in the early 90s?
I remember the show from Nickelodeon, which ages us, but I've never heard of the brand Hey Dude. Have you?
I have not, no.
When teens were asked what the top fashion trends were, leggings, Lululemon held the top spot for females, followed by crop tops and jeans. When asked about top trends, males said Nike/Jordans as number 1. Athletic wear was 2nd, and baggy and saggy pants was 3rd.
Those are back, huh?
Hoodies fell to 5th from 2nd place, and short shorts popped up as at number 9 as a top trend for males in school.
Short shorts for men. Getting trendy. Interesting. Jill, back in the day in the 90s when we were teens, that would not have been a thing. We had those like extra long shorts that were basically
capri
pants. Yeah, basically capri. Which, by the way, had a moment there for men, capri pants, if I recall my high school days correctly in the late 90s. So this group, by the way, teens, this is the latter edge of Gen Z. This is the youngest group of Gen Z because already we have Alpha generation coming in, which are anyone born after 2010, and they're becoming teenagers soon. So these are the youngest of the Gen Zers that we're getting a sense of their style. But that said, I'm not shocked at all of these. You know, it's like these things come around, right? Leggings, baggy pants, Crocs, Vans. Remember, Vans had a skater moment back then in the mid 90s. Then
remember Vans? I still wear Vans.
Jill, Vans never went away for Jill. Everybody.
No.
Some follow-up numbers here. Teens are spending just over $300 a year on beauty. That's up 23% from last year. The jump was led by a 33% increase in cosmetics. That's the highest spending level in a number of years. In cosmetics, ELF, or is it ELF, Jill, remains the top makeup brand.
Yo no sé, Moshe.
Selena Gomez's Rare Beauty held the number 2 spot. Maybelline, that's one I remember. Maybe it's Maybelline. That's in 3rd. Skincare spending also up big. Some brands there owned by L'Oreal, owned by Estee Lauder, are doing well, including The Ordinary and La Roche-Posay. Fragrance spending grew 14% over last year, so they still like the perfumes and the colognes. Jill, I feel like I had the Abercrombie or Eddie Bauer cologne back in my teen days.
I had the Calvin Klein one that was like unisex. I don't know if you had that. The reason though
Aqua di Gio, I feel like Aqua di Gio was one that I had as well.
Dracar Noir, I feel like all the guys had that. But if you talk to any parent of a teen or a tween girl, they will tell you that their daughter probably has better skincare products than they do. It is the thing now. They watch these TikTok videos or YouTube videos on how to apply creams and all this sort of skincare, and they go shopping at Sephora, and they really take such good care of their skin. My 9-year-old niece had a slumber party, and I asked her what they did, and she's like, skincare. Then I'm like, what? Like, what do you mean you have perfect skin? I don't understand.
Jill, they have social media. Back then, you just had microfiche at your local library for your cosmetic tips.
You're really going?
Microfilm and microfiche. You remember those things? Oh, man.
Oh, my God. I don't know if anyone was looking for cosmetic tips on microfiche.
I guess you had like 17 magazine. That's
that was...
But if you want an archived copy of 17 magazine, you had to go to your local library and look it up on microfiche. Jill, one other note here, and this probably won't surprise anybody. They also survey them on the brands that they like the best. I was looking at their social media numbers in terms of where teens are right now, what their favorite brands are in terms of social media. TikTok, number 1. Snapchat, number 2. Instagram, number 3. Probably not a surprise to any parent of a teen or any of you teens listening on your way to school this morning. All right, Jill, and teens listening. we're about to educate you on a bit of history, and we're going to begin in the 19th century because now it's time for On This Day in History, on this October 11th, 10/11/23. We're going to begin in 1869. Thomas Edison today, a very young Thomas Edison, filed a patent for his first invention. It was an electric machine that was used for counting votes for the U.S. Congress. However, Congress never bought it. They didn't like it. But he did get a patent for it. Now, he would file for hundreds of patents. Just about 11 years later, of course, Thomas Edison would famously file for a patent for his light bulb, which he gets a lot of credit for. Though it is a misnomer, Jill, we all learned growing up that Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. The light bulb had already been invented. He was like the 22nd or 23rd person to work on the light bulb. He just perfected the light bulb. So just a small note there that while he did patent the light bulb, that he wasn't the first. He was just working on various iterations. It was a race to figure out the best filament to make it work. All right, a bit of presidential history. On this day in 1884, Anna Eleanor Roosevelt was born in New York City. She was orphaned by the time she was 10 years old. Her mother died of diphtheria. Her father took his own life. She was the niece, by the way, of President Teddy Roosevelt. So she was born Eleanor Roosevelt, the niece of Teddy Roosevelt. After being orphaned, she was raised by her grandmother. She would then go on to marry her distant cousin, Franklin Roosevelt. There were basically two Roosevelts, distant relatives. The ones in Long Island, the Teddy Roosevelt clan, those are the Republicans. The Democratic Roosevelts up in upstate New York, that was the FDR Roosevelts. So she would marry her distant cousin, FDR, and then, of course, go on to become First Lady, a huge activist, the first delegate to the United Nations, the head of the UN Human Rights Commission. And Jill, as some of our premium listeners will find out in an upcoming podcast on the members feed, she had a very challenging relationship with her mother-in-law. FDR's mother was quite overbearing, Jill. She actually tried to intervene and block the marriage and send Franklin to Europe so they wouldn't get married. She would constantly intervene in their affairs. She hated Eleanor for a while. FDR's mother actually would visit the White House and mess with FDR and Eleanor, and she just couldn't handle her mother-in-law. So Eleanor Roosevelt,
what? What would she do?
She just would constantly intervene, being like, Eleanor's not doing the right thing. She's not raising her kids right. We don't like how you are decorating the house. There's a whole bunch of stuff that FDR's mom. By the way, when FDR gets inaugurated in 1933, you know who's on the cover of Time magazine that week? Not President Roosevelt, his mom. That was how much attention she was getting. My Son Franklin turned into a whole series there. So anyway, Eleanor Roosevelt, famous in her own right. And just like us, or some of us, I love my mother-in-law, had problems with her mother-in-law. Sticking with presidential history here, happy 48th wedding anniversary to the Clintons. On this day in 1975, William Jefferson Clinton and Hillary Rodham got married in Arkansas. They had met just a couple years previous while they were both students at Yale Law School. They'd both worked on the George McGovern campaign for president. He would go on to lose to Richard Nixon. Of course, one of them becomes president at age 46 in 1992. She would become the first lady. She would go on, of course, to become the senator from New York, Secretary of State, and the Democratic presidential nominee in 2016.
And it has been a blissful 48 years.
Right. No issues
bumps
between those two. That marriage, they've overcome a lot, but that's a separate podcast. And finally, here on this day in history, in space history in 1984, American astronaut Catherine Sullivan became the first woman to conduct a spacewalk. That mission actually was carrying two women astronauts, Sullivan and Sally Ride. All right, as we typically do, we end with a bit of music here. On this day, 52 years ago, John Lennon's Imagine was released as a single, an iconic song of hope and peace. We all could heed those lyrics this week, especially arguably the best known work of his solo career post-Beatles. All right, just a few years later, another big piece of music history, Jill. The epic single Born to Run became Bruce Springsteen's first ever top 40 hit. On this day in 1975, it marked the start of his transition from a little-known cult figure to an international superstar. He was just 26 at the time.
Tramps like us, Moshe. Baby, we were born to run. I can't sing it. I can't sing it. I'm okay. Such a bad singer.
No, it's all good. And for those who don't know, Bruce, Jill, would that be your number one musician? Is Bruce number one in your book? Or is it Madonna?
No, Bruce. I think Bruce is my favorite overall. And they haven't quite been around as long, but I happen to love the Lumineers as well. Not classics yet, but I love the Lumineers.
All right, we will try to work them into a future On This Day in History. And finally, also on the same day, Born to Run becomes Bruce's first big hit. The TV sketch comedy show, you might have heard of it, Saturday Night Live, debuted on NBC, becoming a landmark on American television. Lorne Michaels, who's still there after all these years. SNL is now 48 years old. Jill, do you have a favorite comedian or era of SNL?
I think it was the Amy Poehler, Tina Fey era. I still think that they were hysterical. You missed it, though. Last week, I was talking about how next season is actually going to be SNL's 50th anniversary season, and they've already started to sell commercials for it.
It's amazing the longevity of that show, how it's remained relevant through certain eras. I mean, SNL, for those of you who are familiar, has had some great periods and some periods of just like, you turn it on for a season, like there's nothing funny anymore. But there were certain groups of comedians. I think Tina Fey and Amy Poehler was a great era there. But I will say that for me, it was that 90s group of Dana Carvey, Mike Myers, Chris Farley, Adam Sandler, and then you had Chris Rock there at the time, going into the Will Ferrell era, the cheerleaders, like, all those various sketches. I just thought they had such a powerhouse lineup there through the 90s. And then they sort of go by the wayside, but then they come back. Of course, they had Jimmy Fallon as a writer, Conan O'Brien worked. You go through the era of SNL. It's really incredible. And then even people who would eventually make it, but didn't quite make it on SNL, like Julia Louis-Dreyfus was briefly on SNL in the 80s. Of course, we would see her really explode.
Oh, I didn't realize
later.
that.
Yeah. So there's these eras, especially in the 80s there, where basically you had Eddie Murphy as like the dominant person, Joe Piscopo. And but it was like slim pickings for a while until you get to that late 80s group. I'm realizing now as I speak, Jill, I spent a lot of time in my childhood. I would rent SNL seasons at Blockbuster and watch them on VCR.
You just keep peeling that onion, Moshe, and the more we learn about you.
Jill, I'll save my thoughts on Chevy Chase and the late 70s group for another time.
Moshe, I'm glad we were able to have some laughs in this podcast because the news has really just been so heavy. Thinking about everybody with family and loved ones in the Middle East who are impacted by what is happening right now. Unfortunately, it does not look like things are going to be wrapping up anytime soon. So we're in for a rough few weeks, even longer.
Yeah, rest assured we'll be here with you. And we understand if you do need to take a break. We actually posted on our Instagram feed, Jill, on the Mo News Instagram feed yesterday, a way to limit your social media feed so you don't actually get all the content, all of this terrible content, which obviously, information is important and you need to be aware of what's going on. But totally understand if you need that mental health break from all of it. And we'll be here when you're ready to come back if you do need to take a break from all of it.
I was actually thinking I might need to take a break, even I'm not, and I even like 10 hours, even like 12 hours or something, and then tap back in when I have to start working on the podcast again. But just constantly having these images in your feed, it is just genuinely mentally exhausting.
And unfortunately, there's also a lot of misinformation going around. So, there's a lot of like, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Have you seen this? And then, within an hour and a half, sometimes we try to fact check them too. We're like, actually, that's not actually a thing. Or unfortunately, that is a thing. So it's important not to, if you can, take a break from it because it can feel all consuming.
Yes. So we will thank you, George Santos, I guess, for being the gift that keeps on giving here.
George Santos, thank you for stealing your donors' credit card numbers and giving us a break from terrible, terrible news.
All right. A big thank you to everyone for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
All right, everyone. See you tomorrow.